housekeeping request. If you could mute yourself when you're not speaking, that would be great. There seems to be a little bit of background noise. So again, welcome. And I'll pause for a moment while somebody finds their mute button. Okay. So, Irma and Diane.
We're waving at you virtually.
And our goals today, I need to make this box go away and I can't see it. Sorry, I'm just having a moment of the projector. I have to see. Okay. Our goals today, one is to debrief the MI training that we enjoyed a couple of weeks ago. We would love to hear you share what you've tried and learned, and to give the opportunity to discuss how you might go about embedding motivational interviewing into your practice. And we would really, really appreciate the time that you might have to provide OPCA with some feedback on how we can better support you moving forward. And I just wanted to do a quick check. Are you able to see the advancing slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For today's agenda, we're going to do a quick connecting of the dots and look at how motivational interviewing and patient-centered medical home training fit together. A quick training debrief, again, to find out what you've tried, what's gone well, and what challenges you may be encountering. Discussions about embedding MI into your practice, and we have some great tools in the forms of workflows that have worked for other community health centers, and to talk about how OPCA can be your partner in helping you achieve your goals. So connecting the dots. How patient-centered medical home uses patient-centered care and how motivational interviewing fits into the bigger picture. Here's the big picture. The patient-centered medical home focuses on putting patients at the center of primary care. I don't know if you can see this great drawing. We use this illustration very often to show, in a perfect world, such as the one we live in, look, so the patient at the center of the transformation of care. Patient-centered care, so a sub-level of the patient-centered medical home, of course, is patient-centered care. First, it provides primary health care that is more relationship-based with an orientation toward the whole person. And secondly, it supports patients in learning to manage and organize their own care, which is a great transition to the final dot, motivational interviewing, whose goal it is to engage patients in active self-management. And that's why we're here today. Talk about this component. I don't recall whether Ariel and Janice brought this cartoon up at the training. Have you seen this?
Yeah, I think they did go over that at the training.
It still makes me laugh every time I open it.
I know.
So if only Hager the Horrible had access to the benefits of motivational interviewing. We'd like to launch right into some conversation, because one of the things we at OPCA are dying to know is, what was your big takeaway from the MI workshop? what was something that you heard or practiced that you went, oh, wow, this is really pivotal, inspiring?
Oh, that's a tough one. I felt a little out of place at the conference because even though I work in a primary, well, not a primary care setting, I work in a hospital. But I deal primarily with mental health patients, so the conversations I have are very different than the majority of the conversations that people were having, you know, at the motivational interviewing training. So,
is this Andrea from Peace Health?
yes.
Okay, it just helps to know the context.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that I use motivational interviewing all the time already. I just didn't really realize, I guess, that that's exactly what I was using. I didn't have all the terminology to know really what you know, the style of conversation that I was having with patients already. So, you know, I'm trained in peer support, so a lot of these concepts are kind of embedded into peer support. They just don't really use the terminology motivational interviewing quite as much. So I think that was my big aha moment. It's like, wow, I already do this. This is fantastic, you know, because now I kind of have the framework and the terminology to go along with it. So, you know, now when people say, do you use motivational interviewing? I can say, yeah, instead of, you know, oh, I don't really know what that is, but okay. Yeah, so that was my big takeaway, I think.
It is nice to have a name for the toolbox, something to refer to, and to at least, I find, do you find that it's helpful then to form kind of strategies and approaches based on knowing the different tools in your toolbox, or?
Yes, yes, definitely. You know, I think that it made me a little more, I think, mindful of some of my word choices maybe are a little bit different now than they would have been before, and that I think I'm more consistent now in using it all the way through a conversation, because I think what I was doing before was, you know, we'd start out the conversation a lot like, you know, well, using motivational interviewing, but then it would kind of lose its way partway through, and we'd, I don't know, it wasn't as, it didn't have the same structure towards the end of the conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you, I feel like I'm using motivational interviewing on you, Andrea, I'm sorry.
Okay.
If I'm hearing you correctly, to use a reflective statement, it's helping you to structure your meetings a little more so that maybe they're a little more productive or efficient?
Yeah, with my patient time, it's definitely helps it to be more efficient. You know, when you're working with people in the mental health field, there's a you know, tendency to get off track in conversations pretty easily, and for people to take really negative tones to what they're saying. So using motivational interviewing to really try to reframe things in a more positive way and to look for the bigger answers, the more positive answers is a good tool.
So the last monthly skill building webinar that we did actually gives great tools for addressing exactly what you are, the challenge that you are speaking of. These will all be on our website soon, and I can make all of these available to you with relative immediacy. But last month's webinar was building momentum and preventing conversations such as that from going downhill. So we're excited to have you part of the conversation, Andrea.
Thanks.
Andrea, I'm going to butt in. This is Irma at OPCA. What I find really also very interesting, you're coming from more of a behavioral health background as compared to many of our clinics, which are primary care. So I'm really struck that MI is so embedded in the work of behavioral health that you do the skills without even calling it out. And I think that is a big lesson that we can learn in primary care, is that the spirit of MI and these skills should be probably embedded into all of our conversations, no matter what the discipline is.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I definitely, as a person who, has used it and it's just kind of part of what I do, I was pleased to see so many primary care providers in the training, because often I get called when my patients are having problems with their primary care doctor. And I'll go with them, and sit with them at the hospital all day through surgeries, and I'll, go to their podiatrist or their cardiologist.
Did you have a big takeaway from the MI workshop, a big aha moment where you were like, yes?
Well, I don't know about that, but it was great to, well, sorry, it was great
So what I'm kind of hearing from you, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is that you saw a lot of value in the discussions, maybe surrounding the collaborative conversation, building pieces, and kind of, as you said, you are not the expert. The patient is more the expert. However, you are an expert in your field, so it's kind of that building a partnership between two experts to help solve a problem, or to try to move in the right direction. Yeah, that's great. Definitely the spirit of MI.
I'm working at a dental clinic, so my interactions with patients tend to be fairly brief. I mean, occasionally I follow up with patients, but I'm there to help provide support while they're here and provide links to resources if there's outside situations, food insecurity or transportation issues, or, I mean, just nuts and bolts Maslow kind of security problems. Try to help with that.
So, Chris, you're a behavioral health coach and in a dental clinic.
Yes. Yes, I am.
Interesting.
Wow, Chris, that is so interesting. And your dental clinic is the dental clinic that's part of La Clinica Community Health Center?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, that's really great that you have those skills in a dental clinic. Chris, this is Irma. I just have a quick question from you. One of the things that I've heard from providers like yourself is that MI sets them free. Like one of the providers that I've worked with from a clinic in Montana felt like MI training let him go. He was no longer, he realized he was no longer responsible for what the patient does. That he could be a partner, but he is not responsible, that the only one really responsible is the patient. Did it have that kind of impact for you, or were you already feeling that?
Well, because of my previous job in the domestic violence field, you know, and working with survivors, it's like you give the survivors options, but it's our philosophy as an agency was that, you know, the survivor is free to choose whatever they choose, and you can't link yourself emotionally to their choice, because you're gonna end up in a world of hurt if you do that. So it's that freedom, but yeah, it's that same freedom of like they're choosing, they are making that choice. I'm not choosing for them, which is a great relief and keeps you healthy. I mean, really.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of lessons we can learn in primary care from those of you in the behavioral health field. You know, you're bringing sort of such a rich and healthier perspective to the work. Thank you.
And I actually, Brenna, just noticed your words in the dialogue box. Brenna, are these available to everybody? Brenna's big aha was reflective listening, which is such a powerful tool. She agrees with Andrea that that motivational interviewing helps have more consistency through the whole conversation. That's great. Great feedback. Thank you. Does anybody have anything else that they want to chime in?
As far as takeaways, I don't really have anything else.
Okay. Engaging and evoking, giving patients the feeling of acceptance and compassion, the elements of partnership between the two experts, collaborative conversation, all good elements and tools to keep at the ready with motivational interviewing. So we're curious to know, because this question is a little bit different from the last. You have your big aha, which we just talked about, but what motivational interviewing techniques specifically have you taken back to your field and tried? I think that you were inundated with many possible things that you could try, but is there something that maybe you hadn't before really taken as a concept and tried in a patient setting? And we're curious to know what worked, what was maybe a little more challenging, because things can feel awkward when we're new to them.
I think for me it was the listening for change talk. I think that was something that I probably wasn't as cued to listen for, and working in behavioral health, sometimes you have to dig a little harder to find it. So I think I found myself listening a little bit closer for those, just any little word that, you know, they kind of let loose that I can kind of grab onto and try to use as a tool to bring things to a more positive place. So I think that was the big technique that I really probably tried to use more. So,
can you provide an example just to sort of give us context on how you tried to use change talk?
Well, let's see. Oh gosh.
And,
I'm trying to think of a good
know,
example. Give me a minute. Let somebody else have some
that's
input, and then I'll think.
perfectly fine. I usually think of things when I'm not trying to think of things.
Yeah.
So when something pops into your mind, we would love to just hear about a time where you were digging for that change talk and you heard a word. And not just if it was a success, but this is all about trial and error. And we learn a lot from those moments that things don't come as naturally as we would like.
Mm-hmm.
Chris or Brenna, any thoughts on some of the techniques that maybe you took back and tried your hand at? Resisting the writing reflex, that can be a tricky one. Maybe more cognizant of opportunities to give affirmations or inquire with open-ended questions.
Yeah, I spoke with a client yesterday, and it was probably the first client that's really been like, oh, Percocets work best for me. You know, I haven't had a lot of drug-seeking patients, but you know, I did the reflective listening and the open-ended questions, and just to kind of just put it back on them and the affirmations, and anyway, they kind of calmed down a little bit. I mean, they were a little bit agitated when I first talked to them, but yeah, I mean, they did all right. I mean, I have to say that my memory is not awesome, and that there's some things that I'm like looking at the slide and saying, I don't remember collaborative agenda mapping or resisting the writing reflex or whatever. But you know, the techniques that I was already using, it really reinforced the techniques that I was already using, and then it added that, you know, that reinforcement of the affirmations and the open-ended questions, and I've really been paying attention to my questions as far as keeping them open-ended, and it's become easier and less conscious.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
That's great. Yeah, when it comes to implementing new concepts, it's definitely a matter of you really have to go out of your way to remember what they are, exactly what you're saying. The collaborative agenda mapping may even be something that you're already doing, but boy, that stuff needs practice and reinforcement. And it sure helps if you have teammates that are doing it too, because you can help each other navigate. But we recognize that it takes practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did any thoughts come to you, Andrea? And no pressure.
Yeah, well, thinking about a patient the other day, there's a patient on our inpatient behavioral health unit who had lost his pet. His pet had passed away, and in fact, you know, when they found him, he had kind of, he was struggling considerably, and they actually had to pry his dead pet out of his hands and bring him to the hospital. He was pretty devastated. So I met him while he was on the unit, and listening to him talk about the loss of his pet and how devastating that was for him, and you know, that he struggled with health issues and behavioral health issues his whole life, and this was just, you know, the last straw for him, and really like listening to what he had to say about the loss that he'd experienced, and and then trying to find those little key words, you know, when he'd talk about how much he enjoyed sleeping with his pet at night, and, trying to bring out those more positive points of his relationship with his pet. And then ultimately the conversation ended in him saying, that he'd really, like to get another pet when he leaves, when he's discharged from the hospital, that's his ultimate goal, is to find another pet that he can have that relationship with again. So, just trying to take the loss of his pet and turn it into, fond memories of everything that he really enjoyed, and the realization that he can have that again, maybe not with the same pet, obviously, but, that relationship can potentially exist with another pet. So that's the one recent experience that I work with so many people. It's hard for me to pull out specific situations.
Of course. And that situation sounds like you had the opportunity to use many of the different tools and techniques of MI.
Yeah. And I noticed that Brenna said on hers, resisting, or in the little chat box, she said resisting the writing reflex is difficult, but still thinking it is possible. So, and I think that's something that I see a lot too, is, the tendency for providers to want to be right. And I think that's definitely something that a lot of the people in the training were struggling with, was the tendency to want to correct people and want to defeat, bad attitudes or misinformation. And really, for me, and having done peer support for so long, really people are more successful in their own recovery if they come to their own conclusions. And I think that really resisting the urge to be right and, just assisting people on their own path is important. And, everybody's realities are very different. So, what you may consider right for a person isn't necessarily what that person feels is right for them. So I think that's a really hard concept for people to let go of sometimes.
Mm-hmm. That's a great illustration. Thank you. So we'd like to, do you think that this is
I think we've already done it.
Okay,
yeah.
We're going to move on and sort of have time carved out to talk about successes and challenges. In the interest of time, it seems that we're getting a pretty good flavor from you, but is there anything that maybe has dawned on you in the last few minutes that you want to put a last vote in for, wow, this has been really sensational, or this has been the very opposite of sensational? Just a last call for any reflections on successes and challenges. Okay. So we're going to take a little bit of a step back and look at the fact that you've taken in all this great information on these tools, and we'd love to hear about your practicing and just how you are finding that you're able to create space to practice these techniques, and how you're actually doing it in real time, in real life. Because it's one thing to have two-day training and take in information and learn all these great concepts, and you have an opportunity to try it at the training. But in terms of taking it back to your work, how are you able to make this happen?
Well, for me, it's just part of my job. I mean, I spend probably about 90% of my day with patients, and and oftentimes that's not in the hospital here. It's in their homes or out in the community. The vast majority of the time it's in their homes or out in the community, and it's generally with people who are in crisis. So, using these skills is just, like I said before, it's just part of what I was already doing, except that the training kind of gave me the fine-tuning for it. So I can't not practice these skills. There's just, with my background and the work that I've done, there's no other way to talk to people as far as I'm concerned. So, not only do I use it with patients, but I use it with other providers. For me, it's just the way people communicate. I use it at home with my family, with my friends. It's just kind of the way that people communicate. And actually, when I'm in situations where I find that I'm communicating with someone who doesn't have those skills, I feel frustrated, like I'm not being heard. So, for me, it's just the way that people are supposed to communicate. I just don't, so there's no option to not practice it. It's just the only way. Does that make sense?
And if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like by the nature of what you do, the framework is already in place. It's simply that you need to bring the mindfulness of knowing the techniques and kind of what's at your disposal and what you might be able to use in any given moment. Does that sound?
Yes. Yeah, and like I said, not even just at work. I mean, when I talk to my children about their day at school, I'm using motivational interviewing. When I talk to coworkers about, problems that come up in the workplace, I'm using motivational interviewing. And, so it really is just the way I communicate in general with people. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. So let's see, I see that we have some feedback from Brenna in the dialogue box. Certain days I feel like I'm making success communicating effectively by using MI. I do 40-minute consultations, and it's possible in every one-on-one with patients. I think even in short conversations with staff or family members, it is possible to use MI, but for some instances it may not come across as the right way to speak with certain situations. Yeah, and I think Ariel and Janice probably touched upon that too, that all tools are not appropriate at all times, and it's just knowing in the moment, what works. But that's great feedback. Thank you for that, Brenna.
So I would agree with Andrea that, I'm integrating that into, working with patients, but also working with staff. I kind of am like an unofficial staff counselor. People believe in the IBH magic, and that's awesome. And, they'll come to me and talk about other stuff. And I use the same principles in motivational interviewing with talking with them, like, what is the things on, what kind of things are on your mind, or what's going on for you, and what do you think you should do next? Just those things. I think it's really the future as far as the kind of training that people need to have to do these kind of jobs where you're working with people with issues. I think it's great. I love the training, and I use it all the time.
Chris, what you're saying resonates with many of our community health centers, and I think one example that I can point to is our partners at the Yakima Valley Farm Workers. They actually trained their entire staff deeply in self-management support and MI, and they are using it just as you say, not only with patients, but they have made an investment to use it within the culture of their organization. So through their staffing, through their leadership, through their patient interactions, really embedding and providing people with these skills so that they can not only move it with their patients, but also embed it into who they are and how they work on an organizational level. So thank you for reminding me of that these skills, you can use them with anybody, honestly. Like Andrea says, with your kids, with your coworkers, with your husband, you know, whatever that situation, once you understand, I think their power, its power. We do have a video on our website. I think it's still on there, and it does talk about the way that Yakima Valley farm workers sort of took self-management support and the concepts around motivational interviewing and embedded it into the culture of their organization throughout. And if not, we can send you that link.
Great.
Well,
So moving along, we were going to have a conversation. I feel like our conversation on embedding just happened.
Yeah.
And Irma is going to share some fantastic workflows.
Can I just break in for a second? I'm noticing a comment from Brenna on here about she disagrees with something that was said.
Oh, sorry.
And she's saying something about someone with war PTSD resonates with MI. Yeah, she doesn't think that someone with, war PTSD resonates with MI.
Okay.
You know, I can't in any way speak to that. I don't know, Andrea, what does the group think? Based on your behavioral health background and your peer trainings, can you weigh in on that?
Well, yeah, actually. I think that MI can be very effective with people who suffer from PTSD, especially with veterans, but I think that it needs to be used in a very trauma-sensitive way. You know, you have to be really careful with someone who has severe PTSD, that you're not touching on those triggers that they're not prepared to confront yet. My husband was active duty in the military, and, you know, he's since discharged. But, you know, you have to know when it's appropriate to touch on certain topics and when it's not. But you can still use motivational interviewing to address those things that you feel are safe to address and to not address those things that you think maybe somebody's not ready to confront yet. I work with a lot of veterans in the behavioral health unit here, some who've seen active combat and some who have not. So, you know, I agree, but I disagree at the same time. Does that make sense? I think there's a time and a place where you can approach certain topics, but MI is always useful.
Yeah, and I think, Andrea, when you do think about sort of the big general concept of MI, that it really is about patient-centered care. In the broadest sense, absolutely, it could always the perspective or that sort of basic tenet of patient-centered care is always appropriate. Brenna is saying that her husband is an Iraqi veteran and he doesn't want to hear reflective listening. Yeah, I can get that. My son doesn't want to hear reflective listening either. He says, "Are you MIing me?" But it's what you're speaking to, I think, Andrea, is that you have to use it at the right time in the right place with the right patient, just like any other sort of intervention.
Right, that maybe reflecting on those specific experiences or certain things they saw is not what you need to use MI for, but maybe, you know, talking about instead, like, instead of focusing on what they've seen and what they felt with what they saw, maybe, you know, talking about what they're wanting from their future, what they're wanting in the moment, rather than, you know, focusing on those negative experiences that they've had.
Mm-hmm.
And like and as Chris says, it can't come across as counselory. It's got to actually sound appropriate.
Yes.
If I could use reflective reading.
And there were actually people like yourselves on the phone that were saying that now their patients are even saying to them, oh, don't use that MI on me. People are getting hip to the skills.
Yeah, because it can come across as very patronizing, I think, if
totally.
You know, you use too much reflective listening or your tone is wrong. You know, you have to be really careful about the way you use it. Otherwise, it can sound very condescending, very patronizing.
You come across as a Saturday Night Live skit. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that we often do is with our primary care clinics is to look at workflows and how people might be embedding self-management support and motivational interviewing into their practice. And I'm going to say with this group that we have on the phone, I think the workflows that we are prepared to share are not as relevant. So I'm actually going to breeze through them in a way that I probably wouldn't do it generally just because of who we have on the phone. These workflows aren't reflective of the work, Andrea, that you're doing at Peace Health. They're not reflective of the work that's going on with Chris in dental, although I think that you could take some of these workflows back as you think about your dental workflows. Anna, I know that you're a health educator at Lapine. And so these workflows may be of interest for you in the primary care setting. So I'm going to just briefly talk us through and say I think they could give you ideas about how to embed self-management support into your practice and or motivational interviewing. But then I think for those of you who are on the phone. So we do have a workflow from some of our partners around embedding self-management support in the work of an MA workflow, and you can look at these when you get the slides. But it's sort of, the self-management support here will start at the front desk, and then different touch points where an MA in a primary care practice can promote self-management support, begin the conversation, and use some of those skills that that the MA gained around motivational interviewing. Another workflow that you'll see next is a representation from UC Davis, again in a primary care clinic, and just sort of outlines where an opportunity around self-management support and the use of some of these skills can, again, fit into a workflow. Andrew, I think we do this in primary care.
Absolutely.
Another workflow that we've got from our partners at Benton was all around how they're trying to embed the workflow of primary care. And for those of you that aren't familiar, there's the Stanford Chronic Disease Self-Management Programs. And this is how Benton Community Health Center embeds those chronic disease self-management programs into the workflows with our health navigators, which are stationed both in primary care and then out in the community. And then lastly is just, again, another way to think about how that dyad of the, maybe there, yeah, maybe.
All the way?
Yeah. How the dyad between the provider and the MA might be able to bring self-management support and motivational interviewing into every single patient visit, thinking about who does it, how one does it, where a warm handoff in, how is it documented, how is it followed up on. Lastly, I'll just show you an example of how one of our clinics, Yakima Valley Farm Workers, actually documents the self-management support that goes on in their primary care clinics. Every patient has a self-management template where they are really clearly documenting what the conversations are around patient goals and how they're actually following up on those goals. And I'm hoping that many of you, even a place like Peace Health or the dental office, is somewhere documenting, what the conversation was and how we are supporting them in their own self-management goals so that it's then consistent from provider to provider. And so we'll send these out, and if you can use them or find parallels to your work, great. If you have any questions for us, I don't know, I'm thinking about Chris, we can look for workflows that might embed self-management support and MI into dental care. Let us know. We might be able to locate some of those for you. So if you have any questions around those kind of workflows, let us know. We'll see what we can find. We are almost out of time. I want to initially just thank you all for this really robust conversation, and I hope that the conversation between the four of us really helped you think about your own work with motivational interviewing and how we can support our patients better. But I would like to just ask some really specific questions about how OPCA is providing this training. You guys just sat through a 2-day training, and it sounds like it was helpful in many ways. It sounds like it was a review for many of those, particularly those of you that are in the behavioral health field. So I'm curious, based on your experience, what kind of training and technical assistance can we, OPCA, provide that would help you continue to use these skills? And I'll give you an example. Some of the feedback we've gotten is that a 2-day training is great. It's enough to give you an overview, but it's not enough to really be masterful at these skills. We've also heard that we would love to see OPCA offer a more advanced MI training. So I'm just curious, based on this 2-day training that the 3 of you attended, how could we follow up? What kind of training can we provide that would actually help you take these skills home and use them?
Well, for me, it was really, I felt like I really needed a more advanced training than what I was in, just because I've used it for so long. And I also found, too, that, the topics that I wanted to address in role plays were drastically different than the topics that, other participants wanted to address. And I actually, unfortunately, made one girl cry by addressing a very serious topic that she was not prepared to deal with. So, and that's sad. I feel really bad about it. I'm laughing, but mostly at my own, mistake. So, there just were a lot of primary care folks in there, and not very many. It was, in fact, the only mental health ones were myself and one other person that I was aware of. So, a lot of people weren't comfortable addressing, the topics that, I would use in role plays, because that's what's relevant to my work. So, so I think that having that division is important to note, and I think it's good to call attention to that at the beginning of the workshop, so that people who maybe feel like they need to group together for role plays have the opportunity to do that.
And then maybe we could also do a better job in how we're marketing it. If it really is primary care focused, to be more transparent. Would my guess be another way?
Well, I mean, OPCA alone should be, that's fairly transparent. But, I think the reason why I got the invitation is because I do work in a hospital, and I don't work specifically in behavioral health, but that's 90% of the referrals that I get. So even though I'm not designated as a mental health professional, that's what I end up working with, because that's what comes to me from behavioral health, that's what comes to me from the emergency room, that's what comes to me from inpatient. So that just happens to be the makeup of the majority of my patients, not because I'm embedded in behavioral health, but because that's kind of what I get. So, I think when they sent it to me, that's I'm a community health worker as my title, so it seemed probably relevant to people, but then when I got there and the topics, that we all address are very different, then, it would have been nice to have other people who were prepared to role play those same sort of topics.
Yeah, that's great feedback, Andrea. Thank you. Brenna, I think we had some feedback from you in the chat that you also agree that
Bringing nurses, dietitians, and CMAs together
okay.
is a good idea.
Or grouping them together. Maybe a little bit higher up, Di. Okay.
Oh,
yeah, all right.
I'm sorry.
Group topics. Great, thank you.
Okay. And Chris, any thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I agree with Brenna and Andrea about maybe having it grouped in different groups. Even in my contingent, the experience between me and perhaps the medical assistants were totally different. They weren't as into it at all. I mean, they kind of needed something almost more basic. I could have used something maybe a little more advanced. It's hard to hit everybody's sweet spot on that. What can you say?
Yeah. Okay.
Great, thank you, Chris.
And we are going to be sending out a SurveyMonkey in 2 weeks. We'd love to hear your deeper thoughts. We will thank you with a gift card for responding at that time. And I think for the remainder, I'm going to share these slides with you after the fact that we'll have resources. Absolutely email me if any of this information isn't clear. Future and my learning opportunities. We hope that you stay engaged and find information that's into your practice. And thank you so much for showing up today and making this such a rich conversation. We really appreciate it and hope it was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.